While, of course, all of Donald Trump's cabinet nominees are dangerous and unqualified in their own right, none of them have embraced the destruction of the own agency that they plan to head up, like Donald Trump's nominee to be Secretary of Education in Linda McMahon, someone who is on board with Donald Trump's idea to do away with the Department of Education entirely. And that came out in several points during her hearing, but none was more shocking than the question asked by friend of the show, Senator Chris Murphy, about how Donald Trump will threaten funding to schools in order to get them to fall in line. This has been the theme of the Trump presidency so far, operating like a mob boss, putting people in positions of fear because he is such a weak individual. And clearly so was Linda McMahon as she crumbled under this questioning, and we are going to get into all that. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me. Now let's get into Senator Chris Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McMahon, good to see you. You and I have spent a lot of time over the years, and I appreciate your willingness to sit before the committee and answer some really important questions. I want to talk to you about an executive order that the Trump administration issued that commands agencies, including the Department of Education, to eliminate grants to organizations and entities that support DEI programs and activities. As you know, this has a lot of schools all across the country scrambling because they have no idea what that means. They don't know because the order doesn't define DEI as to whether they are in compliance or out of compliance and whether they are going to have their federal grants compromised. How does a school know whether it's running a DEI program or not?
Well, certainly, and thank you, Senator, and it is good to see you again outside of the state of Connecticut, where we run into each other. DEI, I think, has been, it's a program that's tough. It was put in place ostensibly for more diversity, for equity and inclusion, and I think what we're seeing is that it's having an opposite effect. We are getting back to more segregating of our schools instead of having more inclusion in our schools. When there are DEI programs that say that Black students need separate graduation ceremonies or Hispanics need separate ceremonies, we are not achieving what we wanted to achieve with inclusion.
Let me give you an example then. So this order applies to Department of Defense schools, and those schools have canceled all programming around Black History Month. So if a school in Connecticut celebrates Martin Luther King Day and has a series of events and programming teaching about Black history, are they in violation of a policy that says schools should stop running DEI programs?
Not in my view. That is clearly not the case. The celebration of Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month should be celebrated throughout all of our schools. I believe that Martin Luther King was one of the strongest proponents of making sure that we look at all of our populations when he said that, he would hope that his children wouldn't be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And I think that is the fundamental basis that we should celebrate Black History Month.
West Point has closed down all ethnic clubs, so the Society of Black Engineers no longer can meet because they believe that to be in compliance with this order, they cannot have groups structured around ethnic or racial affiliations. Would schools, would public schools be in violation of this order? Would they risk funding if they had clubs that students could belong to based on their racial or ethnic identity?
Well, I certainly today don't want to address, hypothetical situations. I would like, once I'm confirmed, to get in and assess these programs, look at what has been covered.
Is that a pretty easy one? I mean, you're saying that it's a possibility that if a school has a club for Vietnamese American students or Black students where they meet after school, that they could be potentially in jeopardy of receiving federal funding?
Again, I would like to fully understand what that order is and what those clubs are doing.
That's pretty chilling. I think schools all around the country are going to hear that. What about educational programming centered around specific ethnic and racial experiences? My son is in a public school. He takes a class called African American History. If you're running an African American history class, could you perhaps be in violation of this court order, of this executive order?
I'm not quite certain, and I'd like to look into it further and get back to you on that.
So there's a possibility, you're saying, that public schools that run African American history classes, right? This is a class that has been taught in public schools for decades, could lose federal funding if they continue to teach African American history.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I would like to take a look at these programs and fully understand the breadth of the executive order and get back to you on that.
I think you're going to have a lot of educators and a lot of principals and administrators scrambling right now.
It is important to note that Linda McMahon's kind of larger refusal to very specifically answer Chris Murphy's question is a part of the point. Donald Trump doesn't just want schools and teachers and counties to fall in line. That's not enough. If Donald Trump is getting them to fall in line, it means for everything he wants them to do, he has to outline a very specific plan. He wants them confused about what they can and cannot do. He wants them always looking over their shoulder, being intimidated, and guessing ahead to an extreme of where they think Donald Trump will take things. They don't want and this is the Trump administration, they don't want to list, here are all the banned books, here are all the banned words. No. Sure, in ways they'll do that. But they want teachers, educators projecting out what they can't do, always worried so that they trim their curriculum even smaller than maybe the Trump administration would even ask for. That's a part of the intimidation, putting the onus on the educator as they fear for their job. And it is terrifying given the state of American education. Even if we were having tons of success in that regard, it would be scary. But especially now, it is terrifying. And it is a point made by Bernie Sanders right here.
That instead of having a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we are looking at a government of billionaires, by billionaires, and for billionaires, whose job is not to improve life for ordinary people, but to make the people on top even wealthier. So in the midst of massive income and wealth inequality, where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, the Republicans in the House yesterday introduced a budget resolution that would provide massive tax breaks to the people on top, and they would pay for those tax breaks for billionaires by cutting Medicaid, education, and programs that working families throughout this country desperately need. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. At a time when millions and millions of working families are struggling, our job is to protect those families and not worry about the billionaires who have never had it so good. But it's not just cuts in Medicaid, as devastating as that would be. We're looking at, if the Republicans get their way, massive cuts to education. And I should also say that the people who are trying to privatize Social Security, privatize Medicare, privatize Medicaid, privatize the Veterans Administration are precisely the same people who are trying to privatize public education in America. We must not allow that to happen. In America, we must not allow our educational system to become a 2-tier system, a system which says that if you have the money, you're going to get help from the federal government, you're going to get a voucher to send your kid to a school that may cost $50,000, $60,000 a year, while the public schools will end up being segregated not just by race, but by class. Most families in America do not have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to send their kids to private schools, and it's absurd to provide public money to make that possible. Our job is not to take away money from public schools to give it to private schools. It is to strengthen public education in America. Further, President Trump has talked about abolishing the Department of Education. Yes, I think everybody on this committee wants to see us go after waste and bureaucracy in every agency of government. But what we must understand is that when we talk about the Department of Education, they are providing vital resources for 26 million children in this country who live in high poverty school districts. Is it the responsibility of the federal government to say that every kid in America, whether you're poor, middle class, rich, gets a quality education? It is. And that is what a lot of what the Department of Education does. Department of Education provides millions of public school students who have disabilities, emotional problems, physical problems, provides them with help. It provides Pell Grants and other important financial assistance that over 7 million low-income students need to get a higher education. So the goal is not to abolish the Department of Education, it is to make it more effective and to make sure that it addresses the educational needs in this country. Mr. Chairman, in my view, we need a Secretary of Education who understands that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, we should have the best educational system on this planet, from child care to graduate school. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we're going to attract the best and the brightest to the teaching profession. You know what? We have to pay teachers the kinds of salaries that they deserve, which is why I've introduced legislation that says no teacher in America should earn less than $60,000 a year. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that schools do not end at 2:30 or 3 o'clock. We need strong after-school programs. We need strong summer programs. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we've got to invest in mental health. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we have got to fully fund the Individuals with Disability Education Act. So there are a lot of questions I have for Mrs. McMahon.
This is what the Trump administration will be about, making our country worse with all of their actions and especially with all of their intimidation. It's the reason why I talked so much before his presidency about my great worry of the pre-capitulation from the mainstream media and the corporate elites, because they are acting like he has already won. Like there won't be courts who try to stand in the way, Democrats who push back, that there isn't an election coming in 2 years, an election coming in 4. If we cede all the ground to Donald Trump, he wins without even having to work for it. And that is much more dangerous than anything else he could do. That's what we have to fight back against, and that's what we have to call out. And we're certainly going to be doing so every single day on the show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button. You can leave a like on this video. And if you stuck around at the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.